Imagine you are, sitting in a dimly lit courtyard in first century Ephesus. Someone unrolls this tiny piece of parchment. It's barely 13 verses long. And the air in the room is just
Oh,
tense.
absolutely. Because as the reader speaks the words, you realize pretty quickly this is not just some friendly pastoral greeting.
Right. It's an intercept. It's a message from behind enemy lines, warning you that the very people sleeping in your guest rooms, eating at your dinner table, and claiming to offer spiritual enlightenment, they are actively trying to destroy you.
It's a profound shift in perspective, really. I mean, we tend to look back at the early church through this lens of, like, romanticized martyrdom. We assume the primary threat was always a Roman soldier with a spear or some sweeping decree from the emperor.
Yeah, lions in the Colosseum, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But in the late first century, the most lethal threat to a house church wasn't a legionnaire at the gates. It was a charismatic, highly persuasive teacher standing right in the middle of your congregation, carrying deeply flawed, toxic theology.
The call is coming from inside the house.
Right. The infiltration was internal. And because of that, the defense had to be incredibly precise.
Which is exactly why we are initiating this rigorous survey of the second epistle of John today. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission is to provide you, the serious student, the seminary entrant, the ministry leader, with an MDiv-level exegetical overview of this tiny but honestly explosive text.
And we are completely bypassing the superficial summaries here. We are getting directly into the primary sources.
Yes, we are utilizing an exegetical workflow based on the Koine Greek text, referencing the Nestle and 28th edition, and we'll be operating from a conservative evangelical perspective, really analyzing not just what the text says, but the theological mechanism is operating beneath the surface.
Because we want to see how 2 John functions as a vital fellowship barometer for the early church. It proves that truth and love are utterly inseparable.
And ultimately, how this inspires a deeper love for the incarnate Christ. So to accurately read that barometer, we really need to establish the sits and Laban, right? The
Yeah.
setting in life.
Yeah, we have to understand the historical and compositional origins of the letter. And it opens with this uniquely unadorned yet incredibly authoritative title. In the Greek, the author simply identifies himself as ho presbyteros.
The elder.
Right.
The elder.
And right there, we have a fascinating point of departure. I mean, the author doesn't use his name. He doesn't say, I, John, an apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ, the way Paul aggressively asserts his apostolic credentials when he opens Galatians or Romans.
Paul is constantly having to defend his right to speak.
Exactly. But this author feels no such need. By simply calling himself the elder, he's assuming an unparalleled, universally recognized authority over the recipient.
Which is telling. Now, from a conservative evangelical framework, we affirm that this is the Apostle John, the son of Zebedee, the beloved disciple, the guy who was an eyewitness to the transfiguration, the crucifixion, the resurrection.
But if you survey critical scholarship over the last century, you're going to bump into theories suggesting a vague Johannine school, or a separate figure known as John the Elder who wasn't the apostle. Yeah, perhaps a later disciple who simply adopted his theological mantle. That theory relies heavily on a somewhat ambiguous quote from an early church father named Papias, which was preserved by Eusebius.
But the internal evidence really strongly resists that fragmentation, doesn't it? I mean, when you lay 2 John right next to 1 John and the Gospel of John, the stylistic fingerprint is just undeniable.
Oh, it's exactly the same.
The vocabulary, the grammatical cadence, the stark dualism of light and dark, truth and deceit, love and hate. It is clearly a unified theological mind.
It is a highly specific dialect of early Christian thought. Furthermore, the external evidence from the earliest generations of the church is incredibly solid. You have early church fathers like Irenaeus of Lyons writing in the late 2nd century.
And Irenaeus had a direct connection, right?
He did. Irenaeus was a direct student of Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna, and Polycarp actually knew John. He studied directly under the apostle, and Irenaeus explicitly attributes the epistles to the apostle John.
So we're not dealing with some long broken game of telephone here.
No, not at all. We are dealing with a direct chain of custody, from the man who walked with Jesus to Polycarp to Irenaeus. So when the author calls himself ho presbyteros, he is speaking as the last man standing. The rest of the original 12 are gone. He is the patriarchal guardian of the Asian churches.
So let's place this patriarchal guardian on the map for the listener. We're looking at a date roughly between AD 85 and 95. John is in his later years, and the well-supported traditional view places him in Ephesus.
which is a crucial detail.
Yeah, we really need to unpack what Ephesus was in the mid-90s AD, because it wasn't just some quiet retirement community for an aging apostle, it was a pressure cooker.
A massive pressure cooker of religious, economic, and political forces. Ephesus was the epicenter of Asia Minor, a bustling metropolis heavily invested in the cult of Artemis, which drove a huge portion of their local economy.
Right. Remember the riot in the Book of Acts?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But during the decade of the 90s, the pressure shifted heavily toward Roman imperial expectations. Domitian is the emperor during the latter part of this decade. And, well, while earlier emperors might have accepted divine honors posthumously,
After they died.
right, Domitian actively demanded veneration while he was still alive. He preferred the title Dominus et Deus.
Lord and God.
Yes, Lord and God.
And the mechanics of that imperial cult were woven into the very fabric of everyday life. I mean, this wasn't something you could easily just opt out of, right?
Oh, absolutely not. Cities in Asia Minor competed fiercely for the title of Neokoros, which essentially meant the official warden or guardian of the imperial temple.
Yeah.
Ephesus held this status.
So if you lived there, civic participation, trade guilds, public festivals, they all required a nod to the emperor's divinity, a pinch of incense, a minor sacrifice, some public declaration.
And refusing to participate wasn't just viewed as a quirky religious preference. It was viewed as political subversion. It was economic sabotage.
Right, because Christians claiming Jesus as Lord were directly challenging the foundational loyalty of the Roman state. But the external pressure didn't just stop with Rome. We also have to account for the post-70 AD Jewish-Christian tensions.
A massive shift. The temple in Jerusalem has been destroyed by Titus. Judaism is in a state of existential crisis, rigorously redefining itself around the law and the synagogue.
Led primarily by the Pharisees at Yavne, or Gemnia.
Right. And as part of this consolidation, the lines of demarcation between traditional Judaism and the new Christian movement really hardened into a concrete wall.
This is when we start seeing the implementation of the Birkat Hamin, correct? Like the curse on the heretics embedded into the synagogue liturgy.
Precisely. It was a liturgical mechanism designed specifically to force Jewish Christians out. If you attended the synagogue, you would be expected to recite or say Amen to a prayer that literally cursed the Nazarenes and heretics.
And a Christian obviously could not say amen to that.
No, they couldn't. So consequently, they were exposed. They were permanently expelled from the synagogue communities.
And the socioeconomic fallout of that expulsion had to be devastating. I mean, for decades, Christianity had sort of sheltered under the umbrella of Judaism, which Rome recognized as a religio licita, a legal ancient religion that was exempt from emperor worship.
That umbrella was their legal protection.
Yeah, so once the synagogue pushed the Christians out into the cold, they lost it. They were now a brand new, unauthorized superstition in the eyes of Rome, completely exposed to the demands of the imperial cult we just talked about.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the specific audience of 2 John. In the midst of this intense, multi-front pressure cooker, John addresses his letter to the eklectokyria.
The elect lady and her children.
Right.
Now, this is a brilliant phrase, eklectokyria. There has always been, some debate about whether this refers to a specific prominent woman, maybe a wealthy patron who hosted a house church in her villa, or if it's a corporate metaphor.
Sure, people debate it. But given the theological weight of the letter, the corporate metaphor makes the most sense.
It acts almost like a protective code name. Like if a Roman official intercepts a letter addressed to the elect lady, it just sounds like personal correspondence. But to the believers, it carries immense theological significance. Like a modern pastor writing a letter to the faithful mother on 5th Street to refer to a specific church plant.
That's a great analogy. It holds the unique distinction of being the only biblical book addressed to a woman, metaphorically speaking. But the metaphor treats the local church as the bride of Christ, echoing the Old Testament personification of Israel as the daughter of Zion.
So calling her the eklectokyria roots the local congregation's identity not in their current, socioeconomic vulnerability, but in the sovereign, eternal choice of God.
Exactly. She is elect. She's chosen, cherished, and she holds a noble standing in the heavenly realms, regardless of how marginalized she is right now in Ephesus.
And her children would just be the individual members of that congregation.
Right. And verse 13 confirms this reading perfectly when John signs off by saying, "The children of your elect sister send their greetings."
Yeah.
That's clearly one local church greeting another.
Okay, so if this elect lady represents a specific house church, she is a church under severe attack. But as we established earlier, the attack isn't coming from the Roman governor, it's coming from traveling preachers. So to understand how John constructs his defense, we really need to analyze his rhetorical strategy and the literary structure of the letter.
Structurally, 2 John is a textbook Greco-Roman letter. If you study the secular papyri recovered from places like Oxyrhynchus in Egypt, you see a very standard format used in the 1st century.
Break that format down for us.
Sure, you have a prescriptio containing the sender, the recipient, and a greeting, followed by a proem, or a wish for health and thanksgiving. Then the main body of the letter. And finally, the eschatological, the standard closing and greetings.
It's very formulaic.
Very. And John adopts this exact structural convention, but he fundamentally subverts the content to deliver an urgent paranesis.
Paranesis being the formal category for moral exhortation. So he isn't writing just to, update them on his travel itinerary. He is writing to dictate immediate defensive action.
Because the urgency of this exhortation is driven by the specific threat identified in verse 7. John warns that itinerant false teachers, whom he explicitly labels as deceivers, the Greek word is plonoi, are circulating among the regional church networks.
Plonoi. The root of that word carries the concept of wandering, right? Of roaming off the established path.
Yes, exactly.
Which is fascinating because it's the exact same root from which we derive the word planet, because the ancients observed the wandering stars moving against the fixed constellations.
That's a really great connection. It's a highly evocative term. These teachers are spiritual wanderers. They have untethered themselves from the fixed apostolic testimony, and their goal is to induce the elect lady and her children to wander off the path with them.
To pull them out of orbit.
Right. So to counter this, John constructs a letter with a very deliberate emotional and logical arc. He doesn't immediately just draw his sword.
No, he doesn't.
He begins with a profound, joyful affirmation in verses 1 through 6. Then he abruptly pivots to a stark, sober warning in verses 7 through 11, before landing on a note of hopeful anticipation in verses 12 and 13.
Let's examine the first part of that arc, the joyful affirmation, because it is dominated, almost suffocated, by a single word.
He creates an inclusio, a literary framing device, using the Greek word aletheia, which means truth. In the first 4 verses, John hammers this concept 5 distinct times.
Let me list them. Whom I love in truth, know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us, in truth and love.
He is establishing a reinforced concrete foundation before he builds the rest of his argument.
But why the intense focus on aletheia? In the Greco-Roman philosophical environment, truth was often viewed as subjective, fluid, or purely intellectual, right? You had Stoics, Epicureans, Middle Platonists, all engaged in this marketplace of ideas where you could adopt and discard philosophies at will.
Exactly. And by pounding the pulpit on the word aletheia, John is declaring that Christian fellowship is not an affinity group. It is not based on shared hobbies or mutual affection or a preferred philosophical flavor.
It's grounded exclusively in an objective, historical, divine reality.
Aletheia is the bedrock. If you do not share the objective truth of who Jesus Christ is, you cannot possess Christian fellowship. They are mutually exclusive.
And once that bedrock is established, the tone of the letter shifts violently in verse 8. He transitions from the joy of walking in truth to issuing heavy military-style imperatives. He writes, "Watch yourselves," in the Greek, "lepit hitonis," literally, keep an eye on yourselves. Look to yourselves so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward.
The pastoral intensity here is massive. He's pleading with them to guard the spiritual capital that has been built up in their community through years of apostolic labor. Notice he doesn't say, watch the false teachers.
Right, he says, watch yourselves.
The implication is that the congregation is inherently vulnerable. They are susceptible to being seduced by these deceivers.
Okay, but wait. Let me push back on this for a second, because look at the mechanics of verses 1 to 6 again. This is incredibly calculated. He frames the opening with this tight inclusio. He orchestrates this precise emotional arc from deep affirmation to a sudden, severe warning. For a personal letter, this is highly structured. Does John's use of a Greco-Roman format combined with such intense moral exhortation make this feel more like a theological trap than a pastoral letter? Like, is he just buttering them up so he can drop the hammer on them in verse 7?
Well, it's easy to read it cynically from a modern perspective. But within the context of New Testament pastoral epistles, this structures the paradigm of true pastoral care. Theology and pastoral care are the same thing here. Think about the psychology of correction.
Okay.
If a leader simply drops a hammer of condemnation without establishing common ground, the congregation will get defensive and fracture. But if the leader only offers affirmation and ignores the wolves, the congregation is devoured.
So it's a necessary balance.
It's the ultimate pastoral balance.
All right.
John affirms their true identity. They are the elect lady, they are loved in the truth, they are walking in the Father's commands, precisely so they have the firm, secure footing required to withstand the shock of the severe warning.
Wow. Okay, so he is reminding them of who they are so they have the strength to reject who the deceivers want them to be.
Exactly.
That reframes it entirely. The theology of their identity is the prerequisite for the defense of their community. Now, to really understand the depth of this defense, we have to look beneath the Greek text to the ancient bedrock John is standing on. We need to explore the intertextuality, the story behind the story.
Which is fascinating because John is pulling the immense weight of the Old Testament into this brief letter, but he does it without ever explicitly quoting it.
He doesn't use massive block quotes.
No, not at all. And that is a brilliant compositional technique. Unlike Matthew, who frequently uses fulfillment formulas like, this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, or Paul, who constructs elaborate arguments from Old Testament block quotes, John utilizes an echo chamber.
I like that phrase, an echo chamber.
And the text is absolutely saturated with Old Testament concepts that have been entirely repurposed to exalt the incarnate Christ.
So let's trace some of those echoes for the listener. In verse 6, John defines love by saying, "And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments." The concept of walking in the commandments is deeply, deeply embedded in the Torah.
Oh, it is the essence of Jewish halakha, the way to walk. It echoes passages like Deuteronomy 8.6, which commands Israel to keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and by fearing him. It resonates with the entirety of Psalm 119.
So for a Jewish thinker like John, walking is not just some metaphor for a leisurely spiritual stroll.
No, it represents the comprehensive, ethical, and active direction of your entire life. It is obedience in motion.
And he immediately pairs this walking with the command to love one another. In verse 5, he explicitly notes that this is not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning. He is pulling directly from Leviticus 19.18, you shall love your neighbor as yourself.
But, and this is key, that ancient Levitical command has been radically updated. The beginning John refers to isn't just Mount Sinai, it is the upper room.
John 13.
Yes. In John 13.34, Jesus tells his disciples, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. The standard of love is no longer merely how you love yourself. The standard is the self-sacrificial, cross-bearing love of the incarnate Son.
And the warnings about the deceivers also have a deep Old Testament pedigree. I mean, the early church didn't just invent the concept of the false teacher in a vacuum. When John warns about the planoi who lead the church astray, he is operating within the legal framework of Deuteronomy 13.
Which is the foundational text for identifying and dealing with a false prophet. Deuteronomy 13 says, if a prophet arises and produces a sign or a wonder, but says, let us go after other gods, Israel is commanded not to listen to the words of that prophet, because the Lord was testing them to know whether they truly loved him.
So John applies this exact paradigm to the itinerant preachers in Ephesus. It doesn't matter how charismatic they are or how deep their supposed spiritual insight is. If their teaching leads away from the orthodox confession of Jesus Christ, they are fulfilling the role of the false prophet from Deuteronomy 13.
Right. Furthermore, the term Antichrist carries profound apocalyptic echoes of the boastful horn in Daniel 7. The king who speaks words against the Most High and attempts to wear out the saints.
So if we look at the mechanics of what John is doing, it's like he's doing a massive software update on the Old Testament. The hardware, the covenantal structure, the call to active obedience, the framework for identifying false prophets, the mandate to love, all of those circuits are exactly the same. But the operating system is now entirely Christocentric.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize biblical theology.
You just can't run the old system without acknowledging the Son.
Exactly. The Old Testament is not replaced or discarded. It finds its ultimate goal and fulfillment in the person of Jesus. The covenant fidelity that Yahweh expected of Israel at Mount Sinai is now seamlessly recontextualized as abiding in the teaching of Christ.
It's all connected.
It is. And we really must understand why John is leveraging this earthy, historically grounded Old Testament framework. He is weaponizing it against the prevailing Greco-Roman worldview.
Right, the Platonic dualism that dominated the intellectual atmosphere of a city like Ephesus.
Yes. In the broader Hellenistic world, there was a deeply ingrained philosophical bias that viewed spirit and abstract reason, the logos, as inherently pure, good, and elevated. Conversely, physical matter, the flesh, the historical realm, all of that was viewed as flawed, heavy, corrupt, and ultimately just a prison for the divine spark.
So the goal of virtually every mystery religion and philosophical school was spiritual ascent, detaching the mind from the corrupt physical world.
Which means the core claim of the gospel, that the eternal, uncreated creator of the universe actually took on human flesh, lived a physical life, sweated, bled, and died an agonizing physical death on a Roman cross. That was not just difficult to believe, it was intellectually revolting.
It offended their deepest philosophical sensibilities.
It was, as Paul wrote to the Corinthians, foolishness to the Greeks. So the false teachers in John were likely attempting to make Christianity more intellectually respectable to their Ephesian neighbors. They were trying to strip away the offensive, physical, bloody aspects of Jesus and turn the gospel into an elevated, abstract philosophy of pure spiritual light.
And John uses the intensely physical, behavioral, and historical reality of the Old Testament to violently counter this hyper-spiritualization. He refuses to allow the gospel to be untethered from history, which leads us directly into the primary theological synthesis of the letter, the inseparable duo, truth and love. John insists, from the opening greeting to the final warnings, that these two concepts have to walk hand in hand. They are the two legs of the Christian life. You cannot walk if one is missing, and if you attempt to separate them, you destroy them both.
We really have to dismantle the modern fallacy regarding these two words, particularly the word love. I mean, if you ask the average person on the street today to define love, the answer will almost certainly center on unconditional affirmation, absolute tolerance, and emotional sentimentality. It is entirely subjective.
And it completely lacks judgment. The modern definition of love basically requires you to affirm whatever someone else desires to do or believe.
But look at John's definition in verse 6. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. Love is not a squishy internal feeling. It is an objective, observable metric of active obedience to the revealed will of God.
Active obedience.
Right. And if we analyze the relationship between truth and love, we see that truth without love becomes a weapon. It becomes rigid, pharisaical, and arrogant. It uses orthodoxy to bludgeon people rather than heal them. It breeds a culture of suspicion and superiority.
But the danger in our current cultural moment usually leans the other way, right?
Yeah.
We see love divorced from truth, and love without truth is nothing more than sentimental enabling. In fact, it is an active deception. If you claim to love someone, but you refuse to tell them the truth about sin, righteousness, the judgment to come, and the exclusive nature of Christ, you are not loving them.
Not at all.
You are abandoning them to their own destruction. It's like a doctor who refuses to tell a patient they have cancer because he wants to be loving and not upset them. That's malpractice. Love without truth is a lie.
It is. And this inseparable relationship reaches its absolute boiling point when John addresses the issue of hospitality. Let's examine verses 10 and 11. John issues a command that sounds incredibly severe to modern ears. He writes, "If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works."
Do not receive him into your house. Bolt the door. To grasp the shock value of this command, we really have to understand how critical hospitality was in the ancient world, and specifically within the early Christian movement.
The ancient world did not have a network of safe, affordable hotels. Inns and taverns were notoriously dangerous, often functioning as brothels and dens for thieves. So for the early Christian mission to survive, it relied entirely on a sophisticated underground supply chain of radical hospitality.
Because they were constantly on the move.
Yes. When a traveling missionary, apostle, or prophet arrived in a city, the local believers were expected to open their homes, provide lodging, feed them, and fund the next leg of their journey.
It was the logistical backbone of the Great Commission. We see it in the Didache, right? The early church manual from the late 1st or early 2nd century, which has extensive instructions on how to receive traveling apostles and prophets.
Exactly. The Didache says you should welcome them as the Lord, but it also gives practical tests. If a prophet stays for 3 days, he is a false prophet. If he asks for money, he is a false prophet.
They weren't naive.
Right. The early church was highly aware that this system could be exploited. And the deceivers in John the Plenoi were doing exactly that. They were hijacking the Christian supply chain. They were leveraging the ethical mandate of Christian hospitality to fund, house, and legitimize their heresy.
So, by ordering the elect lady not to receive them into her house, John is strategically ordering a blockade. He is telling the church to cut off the enemy's supply lines. But I have to ask the question that modern readers are probably screaming right now. Isn't this deeply unchristian, like deeply contradictory? Jesus commands us to love our enemies. Jesus ate with tax collectors, prostitutes, and sinners. He was heavily criticized for his radical table fellowship. How does John reconcile spending 6 verses commanding the church to love one another and then immediately command them to bolt the door and refuse a basic greeting to a traveler? Where is the grace there?
It is the crucial tension of the letter. But we must make a vital categorical distinction regarding who John is targeting here. John is not discussing evangelism. He is not talking about loving your pagan neighbor, providing food for the poor, or showing grace to a confused seeker who wanders into your gathering.
The church is explicitly commanded to do all of those things.
Absolutely. The individuals in view here are active, unrepentant, predatory deceivers who are claiming to possess spiritual authority and are actively attempting to subvert the Orthodox confession of the church. They are wolves.
So the house church model effectively made the dining room table the pulpit. Inviting someone into your home in this context wasn't just giving them a bed, it was giving them a microphone. It was giving them a platform and implicitly endorsing their ministry to the rest of the congregation.
Precisely. If you are a shepherd, your primary mandate is to protect the flock. You do not show hospitality to a wolf by inviting him into the sheepfold. To do so is an act of profound hatred toward the sheep. By welcoming a false teacher into the house church, providing them with food, funds, and an audience, you become, as John says in verse 11, a sharer in their wicked works.
You become an accomplice to the spiritual poisoning of your own community.
Right, so bolting the door is not a violation of love. It is the ultimate expression of protective love for the elect lady and her children.
Which brings us to the core of the entire issue. What is the specific theological poison these wolves are carrying? What is the ultimate test of fellowship? What is the lie that triggers such a massive, uncompromising, door-bolting response from the apostle of love? We have arrived at the central nervous system of the letter, the thematic synthesis and the Christology of John.
And the absolute center of gravity in this text is the incarnation. Verse 7 provides the ultimate diagnostic test for any teacher, prophet, or spiritual movement. John writes, "For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the antichrist."
The incarnation test.
Yes, and the weight of this test hinges entirely on the Greek grammar. When John writes coming in the flesh, he uses a present participle. Ershomenon antarki.
Let's geek out on that grammar for a second because it's vital.
It changes everything. He does not use an aorist or past tense verb. He does not say, Jesus came in the flesh, as a completed action in the past. The present participle emphasizes continuous ongoing action. He came in the flesh, and he remains incarnate. The incarnation is a permanent reality.
That is a staggering grammatical nuance. But why is the ongoing physical body of Jesus the central nervous system of this entire theological framework? Like, why does everything collapse without Erkomenon and Sarki?
Because without the physical flesh of the Son of God, the entire mechanism of the gospel disintegrates. The specific heresy John is likely combating here is an early form of docetism, possibly associated with a figure named Cerinthus, who was active in Ephesus at the time.
Docetism.
Right, derived from the Greek word dokaji, meaning to seem or to appear.
Yeah.
They taught that the divine Christ could not possibly inhabit evil physical matter. Therefore, Jesus only appeared to have a physical body. He was a phantom, or the divine Christ spirit descended on the human Jesus at baptism and abandoned him before the cross.
But if he only appeared to have a body, then he only appeared to die.
Exactly. A phantom cannot bleed. A pure spirit cannot serve as a physical substitute for the physical rebellion of humanity. If there is no real biological death on a Roman cross, there is no historical atonement for sin.
And if there is no physical death, there is no physical bodily resurrection, which means the power of death has not actually been conquered.
Any higher spirituality that diminishes the physical historical reality of Jesus destroys the very mechanism of our salvation.
And the ongoing nature of that participle, the fact that he remains incarnate, has massive implications for his current ministry. If Jesus shed his human body at the ascension and reverted to pure spirit, we lose our mediator. Hebrews tells us we have a high priest who is able to sympathize with our weaknesses precisely because he was tempted as we are in the flesh.
Yes, the theology of a present participle guarantees that there is a glorified human man currently sitting at the right hand of the Father, mediating on our behalf.
And this exposes the profound arrogance of the false teachers. They did not view themselves as destroying the gospel. They genuinely believed they were upgrading it. Look at verse 9. John warns everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God.
Goes on ahead. The Greek word is proegeun, to run ahead, to advance.
It's almost certainly a sarcastic jab, right? Quoting the false teachers themselves.
Almost undoubtedly. They were marketing themselves as the advanced class. They were telling the Ephesian believers, yes, the historical physical Jesus is fine for beginners, it's good milk for the simple folk, but we have evolved. We have ascended to higher, deeper, more abstract spiritual truths.
And John stops them dead in their tracks. He says progressing beyond the historical Jesus isn't an upgrade, it's an abandonment. It is spiritual death.
If you run past the historical Jesus, you run right past God. You leave him behind. You must abide. You must remain, stay put, anchor yourself in the historic apostolic confession of the flesh and blood Savior.
And this fierce defense of the physical, tangible, and real culminates in a moment of beautiful literary irony at the very end of the letter. In verse 12, John writes, "Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete."
It's literally mouth to mouth in the
Yeah.
Greek, right? Stoma pro stoma.
Yes, stoma pro stoma. It represents the most intimate, unmediated physical form of communication possible. And the irony is just breathtaking. John writes a physical letter utilizing literal papyrus and black ink to wage a fierce theological war defending the physical, flesh and blood reality of Jesus Christ. And then he concludes the letter by essentially stating, "I am tired of paper and ink. They are insufficient. I must see you in the flesh."
The medium perfectly matches the message. His theology of the incarnation inherently demands incarnational fellowship.
That is the ultimate synthesis.
The theological truth that God took on flesh to dwell among us directly dictates the ecclesiological truth that we must dwell among each other in the flesh. Letters, paper, ink, technology, they are necessary. Temporary stopgaps when we are separated by distance or persecution. They can convey truth, but they are not the goal. The goal is complete joy, and according to the Apostle John, that joy can only be fully consummated in physical presence.
Which brings us to the final summary of our deep dive. We have traveled from the tension of a dimly lit courtyard in first-century Ephesus, traced the rigid architecture of a Greco-Roman letter, explored the ancient Old Testament pathways of truth and active love, and confronted the undeniable, permanent reality of the incarnate Christ.
We established at the outset that 2 John is a fellowship barometer. It is not a peripheral throwaway note tucked into the back of your Bible. It's a vital apostolic safeguard. For the serious student, the seminary entrant, the ministry leader listening today, the mandate is absolute. You must anchor your ministry entirely in the incarnate historical Christ.
You must ruthlessly test all experiences, all new teachings, and all claims of advanced spirituality by the rigorous objective standard of the apostolic scriptures.
And your joy must be found in seeing believers actively walking in that truth. Not just affirming it intellectually, but obeying it practically. Loving God by keeping his commands, and loving the church fiercely enough to protect it from the wolves who seek to devour it from the inside out.
We need the inseparable duo. Truth without love is a sword swung wildly. Love without truth is a foundation built on sand.
The defense of the church requires both the clarity to recognize the planoi and the courage to bolt the door against them, preserving the sanctuary for the true worship of the Son who came and continues to come in the flesh.
As we close this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to process as you step back out of the first century and into our current cultural moment. John's ultimate defense against a toxic, destructive heresy was an uncompromising insistence on the physical, flesh and blood reality of Jesus. And he finalized his profound pastoral love for the elect lady by demanding physical, face-to-face, mouth-to-mouth fellowship.
Stoma pro stoma.
In our modern ministry landscape, we are increasingly reliant on digital, paper, and ink. We have rapidly normalized virtual church, live stream services, and deeply disembodied online communities. So we have to ask ourselves a rigorous question. Are we accidentally running ahead? Are we, with the best of intentions, unwittingly drifting into the very disembodied matter doesn't matter spirituality that John so fiercely warned the Ephesian church about? When the medium is exclusively the screen, do we slowly lose the theology of the flesh? Consider how you, in your own specific ministry context, can prioritize true, physical, embodied presence in your walk in the truth. Because if the eternal Son of God determined that you were worth coming in the flesh to save, surely we are called to be in the flesh for one another.